Welcome, welcome, and bienvenidos. Thank you for joining us on the podcast, Tech and Tequila. If you don't know who I am, I'm Kat Lopez Shelby, and I'm the founder and CEO of Shelby Technology Solutions. But more importantly, you're here for Tech and Tequila, where we learn a lot about tech and we may have some nice tequila drinks while we're at it. If you're new here, Tech and Tequila is all about everything technology based for your business. So what that means is we have suppliers on here to talk about how they can help you grow your business. We, have mindset coaches on here talking about how to help you grow your business. We're all about business and basically introducing you to different suppliers and different ways that help you within your business. Good afternoon. Welcome to Tech and Tequila, the podcast where cutting edge technology meets smooth conversation, just like your favorite tequila drink. I'm your host, ready to guide you through the latest in tech innovation, industry insights, and some stories about the digital world. Each week, we'll explore fascinating intersection of technology and business, all while enjoying a nice glass of tequila. So sit back, relax, and let us dive into the world of technology with a twist of lime and a splash of knowledge. All right, thank you guys for joining. I really appreciate it. I'm super excited to have Mr. Wes on and Miss Celeste. So let's just start out with a bang, and I'll go ahead and have you, Wes, introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. So Wes Hackett, I work at Lumen Technologies. I'm an advanced solutions consultant here. So I basically help support our partners and ultimately our customers in terms of really understanding what all Lumen has to offer. We do a lot of things around network connectivity, one of the largest network carriers in the world, but we also do a whole lot of things around security, cybersecurity, cloud computing, managed and professional services. And so helping ultimately connect business problems to the right technology solutions is really what I do.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's awesome. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Wes for a while and, had a couple of chances to work with you, and you've always been awesome. So, and let me have Celeste here because she's local here in Texas as well. So,
Hi, I'm the senior channel manager for Lumen. I've actually been working with Kat for several years, and she has become a friend of mine. So thank you for having us on. We're happy to support this. I love this tequila thing that you're doing because it is my drink of choice. Um, my The way I work with Kat directly as she works with people in technology. I kind of help build those relationships, get you in touch with people like Wes, who has all the knowledge to go a little bit deeper into the solutions that we have available. And just basically your main point of contact for Lumen and for Kat.
that's right. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I would be remiss because, of course, this is Tech and Tequila, and Celeste, you kind of answered a little bit. But what is your favorite tequila drink or drink?
I'm tequila, water, two limes. If you've been in the channel with me, I usually have a drink on the table by the time I get there, and I only drink Casamigos.
There you
Mhm.
go. What about yourself, Wes? Do you have a favorite tequila drink, or are you like, not so much?
Truth be told, I'm often more of a beer guy, but I do like, I'd say a margarita. I mean, a
Mhm.
traditional margarita, salt, maybe a little tahini on the rim there as well. And that's usually my drink of choice if I'm going with tequila.
Well, there's nothing wrong with the traditionals. Everybody knows a good margarita, and that's a wonderful way to start the weekend. So,
Yeah.
as we head into this, so I know that both of you guys are for Lumen Technologies, and Lumen has been around for, I would like to say, eons and forever. But why don't we take a moment just to explain, who Lumen is, where Lumen fits, and how they can help, your business to grow and take, and basically, I'd like to say cover as much as possible, but, see way your business and help you.
Sure. And feel free to jump in, Celeste, as you see fit. But I mean, as I kind of alluded to in my intro there, Lumen is, one of the largest network providers in the world, have one of the most deeply peered networks. But really, that's really just the foundation of what Lumen does and where Lumen helps customers. Because connectivity is so important, I think that, it's very much foundational. There's hardly a business in the world these days that doesn't rely on internet and connectivity to kind of do day-to-day operations. But it's really what happens beyond that. It's what are you connecting to? What are the applications that you might be running? And any given business often has tens, if not hundreds, or many more applications that are needed to actually run the business, from websites to databases, all of these sorts of things. And so what Lumen can help with is really, in a lot of ways, consolidate a lot of these different areas of technology that a typical business might have to go out and procure, or historically would have to go out and procure from different vendors. So things like helping not just, again, provide the connectivity, but helping maybe with backing up the servers, or providing compute for the servers themselves in an area of the country or world that makes sense. And then, of course, as we kind of alluded to as well, security, helping make sure that your data is safe, whether it's being stored or it's being transmitted, making sure that it's done so in a secure way, so that ultimately, you're not, your business is not subject to a ransomware attack or some of these, type data breaches that we're often seeing in the news. So we do a lot of things. And I think one of the biggest value adds, again, is helping kind of be a true end-to-end technology provider for companies, so they can go out and really focus on what they do core, their core business, rather than have to worry about all the different technology. We can help with that.
Well, and I think you really hit the nail on the head. I'm sure somewhere there are going to be someone listening to this podcast saying she says that every single episode. But the truth is, the two things that I feel like I talk to a majority of my clientele about the most is about security and about their connectivity, because it is like connectivity is the backbone of almost everything we do. And I mean, and that's whether you're, at a restaurant and they're taking card payments and doing, I like to say, all the magic that they do to know like when the tables are going to turn and how to, and get your text, or, if you work from home, because if you don't have internet connectivity, I mean, you can't do anything. And so it's so important. And I think therein lies when you have someone like Lumen that you can depend upon to help with those types of things, all while making sure you're safe and secure. That's a huge aspect for, anyone, any business owner, and myself. It's important whoever we bring to the table with a client can take care of them and make sure that they do right by them, for lack of a better term.
Right.
So,
and to that point, I think it exactly, the take care of them part is something else I didn't sort of reference, but it's not just that, hey, Lumen's here to sell all of these different technology services to you, but it's also, we can help with that day two management and beyond. So we have a huge professional services practice and managed practice, to where we can come in and often do help organizations that maybe they don't have the in-house IT staff to run some of these, we'll say security solutions would be a prime example. So we can not only provide the software, the technology, but then help actually manage it, monitor it, and make sure it's up and running. And so I think taking care of the business is really a key part of Lumen's focus as well.
well, and one thing that kind of leads to the discussion about is, I know we're just right at the beginning of 2024, but there's lots of trends we saw towards the tail end of 2023. I mean, you've got the AI trend. I say trend, but it's a new technology that everyone seems to be using in some way, shape, or form. And what trends do you see for this upcoming year in 2024?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think I'd be remiss not to bring up AI. As you pointed out, I think AI is probably the largest sort of technology shift that we've seen, arguably ever. Certainly, it's appearing that way. And I think, since we're talking about cybersecurity, the trend, and it's already sort of, I guess, AI is being used for a lot of positive things, but it's also being used by a lot of the threat actors out there. And so this idea of using generative AI to craft things like phishing emails that historically might have been pretty easy to spot. You'd often have, grammatical errors. You might have had somebody who maybe, for example, English was their second language, and there would be some clear clues, where it's increasingly difficult when these threat actors can use these AI platforms to generate very sophisticated, very authentic looking, email spear phishing type campaigns and so forth. So I think that will continue. Probably not. Not going to slow down anytime soon, but I think the positive side of that is that AI and machine learning and some of these technologies are also being used on the vendor side. So, for example, Lumen, one of our primary, I guess, sort of the brains behind our cybersecurity technology is a group called Black Lotus Labs, an internal group to Lumen. And so that group really is has a bunch of people, very smart people that are monitoring our Lumen network 24/7. But they're also using technologies like AI and machine learning to really analyze huge amounts of data, analyze this massive network that we have, which is essentially tracking data being sent all around the world, and really use AI to more quickly identify when things are kind of looking awry, when threat actors might be spinning up new infrastructure in certain parts of the world, for example, and very quickly, kind of stopping those threats. And so I think that trend for sure is going to continue, kind of the use of AI, both for good and for bad. But an additional one that I don't see slowing down, at least we're seeing a lot in our business, is, I guess following 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw this huge increase to remote work. In a lot of ways, I think that's here to stay in some form or fashion, but we have seen some businesses move back to the office. But what seems to be the sort of most common is some version of hybrid work. I'm seeing a lot of organizations adopt some version of, some users might be working remote, some are working at the office at least a couple days a week. And so the need to be able to access data, access applications, do everything in a secure way from really wherever you're connecting from, is really a trend we see increasing. And so that's where, and that could be a topic we could get into, I'm sure, in much more detail, but something like SASE has been a very, trending area of our business right now to help secure these remote workers, or hybrid workers, and whatever the case may be.
Well, and I think that when you think about looking into SASE and other options for a business, I mean, what are your recommendations for like your average, I say your average, but for your business owner or for the person that's in charge of these, to make sure you have in place so that you don't leave yourself open to a threat actor? I mean, and I always put the caveat in here that, you can put everything in place, because we see it all the time where these large companies that have massive amounts of financial backing, get hit. But it's still, what are things that you recommend to clients? Like, hey, if you're going down this security path, this is where I would start, and let's make a plan going forward. What kind of recommendations do you make?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a great question. And as every situation has dependencies, so it obviously depends to a certain extent. But I think it's much like you said, it really helps to have that plan. So what I would recommend is, if the organization has not already done some version of a vulnerability assessment or full-blown kind of penetration test to understand where their gaps are, just current state, that's a great place to start. Not a huge lift, at least in terms of costs. I mean, they can vary, but that's something that can be done in sort of a one-time, payment, if you will. They can get a report and kind of look at, okay, here are the biggest gaps, and from there start to make a logical kind of roadmap of where to go. As it relates to SASE, I think, SASE is a compilation of a bunch of different technologies and functionality. And so similarly, I think what we see is often recommend to organizations that aren't sure about SASE, or they're starting to go down that road, is to do what we call a SASE assessment, where we can come in and really look at what their current environment looks like, what legacy technologies may already be in place. Because ultimately our goal here at Lumen is not to come in and try to rip and replace current technologies and try to, sell everything brand new. We really want to augment what's already in place to create more of a, depth of defense strategy. So helping an organization understand what are the current layers they have in place and where are the gaps between those layers, so that we can sort of fortify them further is really, I think, a great place to start.
Yeah. And where do you see, as far as with businesses, usually where they're missing, like especially with SASE, like what type of gaps are you seeing that are pretty commonly missed as they go into that SASE path, so to speak?
Yeah, I'd say, one, I've seen, I think zero trust network access or architectures are still relatively new. I think going back to your prior question as well, that's going to continue to be a trend. So I think implementing an actual zero trust framework across the organization is a portion of SASE that I don't often see or at least I've talked to many organizations that haven't been able to fully kind of implement that. Granted, there's a lot that can go into kind of changing essentially the whole culture on sort of a default deny approach, and a lot that can go into it. But there's when there's remote users and concerns about certainly things like ransomware, I think moving towards zero trust is a great place to start that often might get missed with so much of the focus. I think often on sort of the next gen firewalls or the SD-WAN kind of components of SASE, not often thinking about sort of the zero trust piece.
Well, and I think for a lot of clients, they go into this, and just bear with it. I like to think of zero trust as like a medieval castle, right? So you want to think that, okay, we're going to set this up. Like for me to get in an attack, I've got to first off get through this moat to get here. And then I've got to like either tear down, well, I say tear down, let's say set fire. I mean, I think we've all seen like Braveheart and stuff to get, the drawbridge back down. Or, we've got to keep putting these ladders up constantly to try to get in. And when you create a zero trust network, you're basically putting all these things in place saying, okay, so, the king can get from point A to point B without any issues. But, this little low peon over here, whatever that is, I would say a serf or a soldier or something, their whole job is to stand out here outside this, moat. And so if they're trying to get in, then they don't need to be there at all. I mean, does that kind of...
I really like the analogy. Yeah, I think, it resonates. It's very similar. I always think of it just in terms of like, just because I might have a party at my house and I might invite over some neighbors and some friends, and I let everybody in through the front door, and, maybe the party's in the living room or out on my patio. Just because I'm letting people in to do that doesn't mean they're allowed to go into every room of the house and look through every one of my drawers. It's sort of a compartmentalized permission structure. But I like your castle analogy. I think that makes a lot of sense and absolutely is accurate.
Yeah. And I think, as, a business, as you start to look into any type of digital transformation or moving anything to the cloud or going down the SASE path, it's having, number one, I think sometimes people, I don't want to say get in a rut. My experience has either been people either are like, okay, this is what we're going to do, and we just plow that direction, or there are people that are like, no, I'm going to like hug this server. We're going to stay here forever. Kind of like, that you go into the, I don't know, I'm going to say like not a car dealership, but the auto body shop, and they've got this like, 100-year-old phone system. They're like, we're just going to keep this forever until it breaks. And then they have to make a decision really quickly where they don't have a time to really research it. So, I mean, what types of recommendations do you make for someone who's just thinking about like, okay, we're going to go down this path? Like, I guess, what questions should they ask? What things should they look at? Any of those types of things.
Yeah, I mean, that's also a very good question. I think it does depend on, if we're going to talk about, in this case, SASE specifically, I think they've got to understand, and your point was very valid. I see this all the time as well, where, it's not that we're competing against another vendor. In many cases, it's often we're competing against the customer doing nothing, sort of the status quo. And so I totally take that point and see that as well. I think helping ask the customer questions on, well, what happens when this, this old phone system or this server, whatever the case may be, does go down. Not trying to poke holes at them or put them on the defensive, but really I like to ask questions just to understand, have you thought through what that downtime would look like? Have you thought through some contingency plans? Oftentimes we'll see that, in your example of maybe a smaller, auto parts dealer or something, they might have one IT person who might be getting close to retirement or something. And you start to help them understand, well, what happens when that person's out, or moves on, or, takes an extended vacation, whatever the case may be. Do you have other resources available, or is your business sort of reliant on this one key, resource? And so helping to kind of, I guess, help the customer understand the pain that they may not have experienced. Knock on wood, that one server might have been still kicking for the last several years and all is good. But helping them understand what that pain would look like can then help open their eyes to, okay, now let's help run some numbers and really look at the potential, cost savings and or benefits of a solution that we're looking to implement. And so then we can start to actually have that numbers conversation. But the customer has to be acknowledging that, there is a financial or otherwise penalty that could be incurred if that status quo were to go down.
Yeah. Well, and I think you really hit on it when you were talking about, a lot of times, I mean, just with the nature of the beast and trying to find people, I myself has experienced while trying to hire someone for an area, it's a long time sometimes. And especially, and I don't want to say when you're out in Timbuktu, but like if you're out in West Texas or you're out in some of these smaller areas, it's finding that tech person. So, I mean, you talked a little bit about how Lumen can help with that.
Mm.
So can you explain that just a little bit further of what that looks like and the support that Lumen can provide?
Sure. Yeah. And that really goes back to another trend that I don't see slowing down in 2024 either.
Mhm.
This whole essentially labor shortage of specifically cybersecurity professionals. It's very clear. There is more demand for these professionals. And this is a national statement, not just Texas specific, but
Mhm.
certainly still relevant in Texas. More demand for these services than there is supply of people to do the jobs. So it can be very challenging to hire and retain these types of people. And so that is where the often where some of these managed services or in the case of cybersecurity, there's a whole bunch of things that we can talk about. But just sticking with the SASE, even for an example, most of our customers choose our fully managed offering. So
Mhm.
ultimately, it's a relatively low or minimal lift for customers that want to implement this solution because we can actually come in and help with installation and deployment, but then that day two and beyond, help with monitoring and ticketing and some of these other ongoing sort of activities that would often require an IT personnel. So when it
Mhm.
comes to other security solutions that I see a lot of customers gravitating toward help with, something like a security operations center.
Mhm.
So that's basically a 24/7, humans actually watching, we call it eyes on glass, what's happening in a customer's environment and alerting and as to when things
Mhm.
are occurring. If there is a potential incident of compromise or a potential threat. Well, often organizations don't actually want to hire and have somebody or have multiple people working 24/7, 365 days a year to do that.
Mhm.
So that's where they come to, a company like Lumen, and we can help provide that. So sort of that round the clock type of service for organizations that may not have the in-house ability to do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like you said, there's like this staffing, for lack of a better term, we'll call it a staffing shortage, but
Yeah.
it's more like there's more positions than there are people to take over these positions right now.
Right.
So you're either, grabbing them from someone else and being like, come here, come on, I'm where you want to go. And I think a lot of times, when clients look towards doing any type of changes, that definitely comes into the equation. Is like, how are we going to get this done? What happens if, I'm just going to say, Jeff Smith over here decides to up and leave in the middle of this? Like, are we going to be stranded? What does that look like? Um, and I mean, all those are great thoughts. I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't bring up I mean, I know you talked about connectivity,
Mm.
but touching on something that I think goes kind of along with that is Lumen's DDoS offering. I would be remiss if we did not bring up Lumen's DDoS offering and how that kind of goes along with your tech staff and goes along with your connectivity and how that can help you.
Absolutely. So DDoS or distributed denial of service attacks, many have probably heard of these types of attacks. In fact, I believe the first DDoS attack was launched in the 90s. So in the technology world, we almost ancient times, right? But
Mhm.
the fact is, DDoS attacks are still very relevant today, actually increasingly relevant. So every quarter we release our kind of findings, and we're actually seeing DDoS attacks are both on the rise still to this day in both frequency. So the number of
Mhm.
DDoS attacks are increasing quarter over quarter, and the size of these DDoS attacks. And so what is a DDoS attack? I mean, in essence, it's basically overwhelming a circuit or overwhelming a piece of infrastructure with amount of traffic that can't handle. In many
Mhm.
cases, this could happen toward a website with more of these layer 7 type attacks, where malicious actors are basically often they're using botnets or various other technologies out there to direct a huge amount of traffic to we'll say a customer's, you know, server, for example, and ultimately taking it down, taking it offline. And so that in and of itself is very problematic. You can imagine almost every organization these days has a website. And, if that were to go down, could be very problematic. In the case of e-commerce businesses, that could be extremely expensive to even lose minutes of downtime. But what we're seeing is it goes even beyond that. So there's been another trend in cybersecurity of what are called multi-vector attacks. So it's often not just the DDoS attack itself that is the main goal of these threat actors. They're launching DDoS attacks often as sort of a distraction, sort of a smoke screen, to get the IT and security teams focused over on one side of the business, trying to figure out what's happening, while meanwhile data is being stolen out the back door effectively. And this is a fairly common sort of situation we're starting to see. And so DDoS is something that Lumen can help mitigate. We have DDoS mitigation solutions and help many, many customers out there, because I guess it ultimately goes back to that massive network I talked about. Because we have this massive network, we also have these what are called scrubbing centers built out around our network that can analyze traffic that is coming in and basically determine, almost, I think of it like a huge fish net or something. And it can basically say, look at what traffic is legitimate traffic and let it through the net and catch all of that other traffic that's not legitimate, that would be part of a DDoS campaign. And we can do that because of various technologies we have with Black Lotus Labs and our ability to understand where a lot of these threat actors are operating out of and where their traffic is coming from. And so by doing that, we can pretty much block, some of the largest attacks out there. We've got over 170 terabits per second of mitigation capacity. And so customers that use our DDoS mitigation can basically be assured that they have, their systems, whatever they may be protecting in this scenario will be up and running, regardless of the size of attack that comes their way.
Yeah, and I can only imagine having just gone, and I always call it DDoS season, the fourth quarter of this year, because you've got the holidays and you've got everyone and the importance of staying up and staying complete. So it's like a perfect time for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, Q4 is historically a very bad season for DDoS attacks for sure.
Exactly. So if someone is coming in and saying, hey, I want to work with Lumen, what do you find is the best way to start the conversation? Like, what is your recommendation that you have?
Yeah, I think, and this might go back to my title as I introed it, it's one of our advanced solutions consultants, but I really like to be much more consultative to understand what that customer is ultimately looking to do. Because we do so much at Lumen, we're not the type of vendor that's sort of, I guess when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, as they say. Well, we really don't go that approach. We have a whole bunch of stuff in our arsenal. So I think generally the goal is going to want to be to sit down and talk through just overall business. Really, we like to start with the business before we get to the technology to understand what's core to your business, what are you trying to do, and what are your concerns, and then we can understand, okay, well, what of the technologies that we may have can enable your business to be more profitable, or whatever the business outcome you're actually after is. So often, whether that's in security, I mentioned assessments. On the connectivity side, that could be more of a broader network audit, helping understand just what are you currently paying, what does that look like. But generally, starting from that position helps us to provide more relevant solutions.
Got it. And as far as, and I know with it being January, and I've seen this with quite a few different clients, new regulations went into place, new compliance requirements went into place. Is there a path where Lumen can help someone if they say, here's what I have to do, and like work with you guys to get those things done?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a pretty robust compliance and sort of readiness program as well. Don't mean to belabor the point on assessments, but that's another area when it comes to compliance. We actually do things like HIPAA compliance and PCI and some of these other sort of, depends on what the particular client may be subject to, what compliance requirements they have. But we have a huge group that can come in and help really kind of build out a plan to sort of address any gaps they may have with being compliant within the new year.
Okay. Yeah. And I can't tell you, obviously in West Texas, there's always compliance and regulations that I like to say, like they're like, oh, they sprung them on me. And I'm like, not, maybe not exactly. They've been here telling you that it's going to happen. But I mean, preemptively having kind of that compliance and regulatory assessment will help head in the right direction, help you start the process, the decision making, and I think really what I continue to hear repeatedly besides with the assessments is, it goes back to what you don't know, you don't know. So if you don't know you have this hole, you can't fix it. I think we've covered some great information here, but if there's one thing that when you're looking at the trends and you're looking about helping people like stay protected, stay cyber safe going into 2024, what would that be? Like, what would your recommendation on that be? And, and if indeed like it's an assessment or pen testing, how often do you feel it's important to have those?
Yeah, I think that would probably be one of my kind of main takeaways here is that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, to your point. So having some level of assessment done, I think it's got to be kind of table stakes for every business out there. In terms of the frequency, it will be dependent upon what industry. But I think given AI and some of the other trends we've already talked about so far, the threat landscape is changing and it's changing faster than ever. And there's no signs to that slowing down. So I think, at a minimum, kind of biannually or twice a year would be a, kind of a minimum recommendation. Some organizations will prefer to do quarterly type assessments. There are different types of assessments that can be done to get, again, different views into the business, different types of pen tests and so forth. But I think that's probably a great place to start. From there, you can then be more logical about what types of solutions you want to put into place. Because the thing with security is there's so many different solutions out there, and really it ultimately comes down to budget and some of these other factors. So you really can't necessarily have every possible security solution out there, but you do want to decrease the risk as low as you possibly can for your business. And so to do that in an intelligent way, it helps to have an assessment and be able to look holistically at the business so that you can create a real kind of logical roadmap as to what technologies to then go implement. And so doing that at least a couple times a year, I think is absolutely best practice.
No, thank you. And I personally couldn't agree more. I mean, I definitely think you should probably have one at least once a year. I'd say, twice a year is better. I always say, quarterly is great, but, we all understand that sometimes there's things that stand in the way of that. And, I cannot thank you enough for hopping on here today, just kind of to go over this. Hopefully we've given some great ideas for some businesses out there, how to, how to protect themselves, things to think about, and trends coming up. And I thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
It looks like we actually unfortunately lost Celeste at this point, but I know that she was traveling today, so she may have just had to run off. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of Tech and Tequila. I hope you enjoyed our conversation today. To stay updated about all things tech and more, don't forget to visit us at our website, shelbyts.com. If you loved what you heard, remember to show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our podcast. Your 5-star ratings and reviews mean the world to us and help us to reach more listeners just like you. So muchas gracias again for joining us with Tech and Tequila. Thank you so much. You learned a lot about tech, and maybe you had a nice drink of tequila.